Daisy and the Trouble with Giants by Cass Gray. For Geraldine, a Giant Amongst Writers. Chapter 1. The trouble with giants is they shouldn't live at the top of magic beanstalks. If giants didn't live at the top of magic beanstalks, then what happened today wouldn't have happened in the first place. Or the second place. Or any of the places in Nanny and Grampy's garden. Nanny wouldn't have got cross. Mom wouldn't have got cross. Grampy wouldn't have got cross. No one would have got cross. You can't blame me if magic beans don't sparkle. Magic beans would be really easy to spot if they did sparkle like magic. But they don't. Which isn't my fault. Chapter 2. I'd love to meet a real giant. Giants have giant shoes with giant buckles, giant clothes with giant buttons, giant front doors with giant doorbells, and inside their castles they have giant tables with plates full of giant food. If I was a giant, I'd eat crunchy creams as big as tractor tires. And I'd keep them in a biscuit tin as big as a house. If I wanted a drink, I wouldn't pour my orange squash into a glass, I'd pour it into a swimming pool. And then I'd drink it with a huge giant straw. I reckon a giant straw would be as long as a ladder at least. Even longer probably. Maybe even as long as 2 drain pipes. I bet a giant could empty a swimming pool of orange squash in about 2 sucks. 1 suck if it was lemonade. Because lemonade is the best drink in the world. Meeting a giant for real would be so good. He could pick me up and put me on his shoulder and we could go everywhere together. We'd have giant adventures and everything. When we got thirsty we could drink giant lemonades, and when we got hungry we could eat giant crunchy creams. Or custard creams. I don't really mind. That's another trouble with giants. They get really hungry and really thirsty. Which is why they go fee-fi-fo-fum. The trouble with saying fee-fi-fo-fum is only giants should be allowed to say it. Otherwise it can end up getting quite rude. In story time at school on Friday, Jack Beachwhistle said fee-fi-fo-fum really loudly. And then he said, Daniel Baines is a stinky bum. Which rhymes. But it isn't very nice. Mrs. Peters, our teacher, doesn't like it if you shout out in class. Especially if you shout fee-fi-fo-fum, Daniel Baines is a stinky bum. She said if Jack Beachwhistle didn't say sorry to Daniel Baines straight away, then there wouldn't be any more story times on a Friday ever again. For any of us. Which is really unfair, because why should me and all my friends not get any more stories just because of what Jack Beachwhistle said? That's the trouble with Jack Beachwhistle. He can't control his words. Especially during story times. The trouble with story times at school is we only get 1 story. I wish we got 100 stories. And I wish all the stories were about giants. Mrs. Peters is really good at reading stories. She does different voices and everything. When my mom reads me stories at bedtime she does the same voices for everything, so like if there's a princess and a prince in the story they have the same sounding voice even when one's a man and one's a woman. Which isn't right really. Mrs. Peters does princess voices, prince voices, king voices, witch voices, wolf voices and even frog voices. My mom just does mum voices. But I do still like her reading stories to me. On Friday Mrs. Peters read us the story of Jack and the Beanstalk. It was really good, except for when Jack Beachwhistle started fee-fi-fo-fumming all over the place. The story of Jack and the Beanstalk has got all sorts of really exciting things in it, like the giant, he's the best bit, and a hen that lays golden eggs, and a harp that sings all by itself, and golden treasure, and a magic beanstalk, plus a really sharp axe. Mrs. Peters did all the voices and everything. Apart from the beanstalk and the sharp axe. The trouble with beanstalks and sharp axes is they can't speak. Which means they didn't say anything during the story. But everyone else did, including Jack Beachwhistle. Mrs. Peters put the book down when Jack Beachwhistle started fee-fi-fo-fumming. She said just because the hero in the story happened to be called Jack too, there was no excuse for silliness. Or shouting. Jack Beachwhistle is always being silly. And shouty. And rude. Anyway, he did say sorry to Daniel in the end. So we will still get stories at school next Friday afternoon. I hope Jack Beachwhistle doesn't. I hope he has to stand outside the classroom and be really sorry. Because I don't think he was sorry at all to Daniel Baines. Neither does my best friend Gabby. Chapter 3. On the way home from school after our Jack and the Beanstalk story, Gabby and me pretended we were giants too. Gabby changed her name to Gabby the Great and I changed my name to Daisy the Enormous. I couldn't think of a gianty word that begins with D. Neither could my mom. Apart from dinosaur. But Daisy the dinosaur didn't sound right. Plus dinosaurs aren't like giants. Well, they are giant, but they don't look like giants. So I went for enormous. Pretending to be giants is brilliant fun. Gabby and me did great big giant footsteps instead of normal ones. All the way home. We pretended the cracks in the pavement were roads. We pretended that all the ants by our feet were cars and all the gnats in the air were helicopters. That's what happens when you are a giant. Everything around you goes really teensy because you're so tall and high up. Someone had thrown an orange squash carton on the pavement, so we pretended it was a really tall building. And then we trod on it. Then Gabby saw some chewed-up chewing gum on the pavement and pretended it was a really big mountain. Then she trod on that too. The trouble with pretending chewed-up chewing gum is a mountain is if you tread on it, it gets stuck to your shoe. Really stuck. Especially when it's a hot day. Mom said that on hot days things warm up in the sunshine, and when they warm up they go all soft and sticky. Especially things like chewing gum. You should never tread on chewing gum on a hot day. Especially chewed-up chewing gum. Actually, Mom said it's probably better not to tread on chewing gum at all. Even on cold days. Gabby said she had no choice, because she had changed her name again. This time she was called Gabby the Mountain Crusher, and so when she saw the mountain she just had to tread on it. Mom said she would have to be Gabby the Foot Scraper now, because the only way to get the chewing gum off would be to scrape the bottom of her shoe along the pavement all the way home. She did look funny. When we got to Gabby's house, Gabby and I promised we would play giants all weekend. I said I would go to Gabby's house to play on Saturday, and Gabby said she would come to my house to play on Sunday. That's when my mom told me we could only play giants together on Saturday. Because on Sunday me and my mom were going to my nanny and Grampy's for lunch. In our new second-hand car. Me and my mom quite often go to my nanny and Grampy's for Sunday lunch. Mom says it gives her a break. I'm not sure what from though. The trouble with going to my nanny and Grampy's for Sunday lunch is sometimes I wish Gabby could come with us. Really wished Gabby could come with us this Sunday, because playing giants properly takes 2 days at least. But Mom said Gabby wouldn't be able to come with us this Sunday. She wanted to get used to driving our new second-hand car before she started giving people lifts in it. That's the trouble with new second-hand cars. Green ones aren't as easy to drive as red ones. I said that if Gabby and me put our seatbelts on and closed our eyes all the way there, we would be fine. But Mom said that wouldn't be necessary. And anyway we would have to give Nanny more notice. My nanny makes the best gravy in the world, plus she gives me loads of roast potatoes. Trouble is though, if you don't tell her at least 6 weeks before that someone else is coming to lunch, she'll get into a bit of a tiz. Gabby says her nanny gets her roast potatoes out of a bag in the freezer. And her Yorkshire puddings. But my nanny makes her Yorkshire puddings and potatoes herself. I love going to my nanny and Grampy's house any day of the week. They've got a shed with real mice holes in, plus they've got apple trees and plum trees, and a wheelbarrow. The trouble with wheelbarrows is sometimes they squeak. My Grampy's wheelbarrow really squeaks. He says it isn't the wheelbarrow, it's the mice in the shed trying to trick us. But it isn't. It's my Grampy trying to trick me. Sometimes my Grampy puts me in the wheelbarrow and takes me to London. Not real London. Pretend London. We pretend that he's my taxi driver and then off we go. London is the patio, and Buckingham Palace is the swing seat next to the red flowers. Going to Nanny and Grampy's is one of the best things in the world. Except for when I do something really, really wrong and get really, really told off. Like today. Mom said we'll be lucky if we ever get invited back to Nanny and Grampy's after what I did today. Even if I did say sorry. And even if it was a giant sorry. Chapter 4. The trouble with playing giants with Gabby is she always wants to be the giantest. When I got to her house yesterday morning, I told her that I had changed my name to Daisy the Ginormous and that I was definitely the giantest giant because I had grown 100 meters higher in the night. Trouble was, that made her really jealous. So every time I said how tall I was, she said she was the same and a bit. The trouble with me saying I was 100 skyscrapers high was Gabby said she was 100 skyscrapers high and a bit. The trouble with me saying I was 2 million trees high was Gabby said she was 2 million trees high and a bit. And the trouble with me saying I was a zillion big red buses high and a bit was Gabby then said she was a zillion big red buses high and 2 bits. Which made me really cross. So I changed my name to Daisy the Giantest and no returns. Ha! Gabby had to be the smallest giant after that. Mind you, even then she still said she would only be the smallest giant by half a bit. Sigh. Gabby's always doing things like that. When her mom and dad heard us arguing in the lounge, they came in and said that we'd have to play something else if we couldn't stop arguing. But there was no way we were going to ever play anything else. Playing giants is far too much fun. So we stopped arguing. And we went upstairs to play giants in Gabby's bedroom. Gabby's bedroom is perfect for playing giants in. We pretended her bed was our castle, her wardrobe was the castle kitchen and her pillows were white fluffy clouds. You need white fluffy clouds on the floor to pretend your castle is really high up. Then we did a giant magic spell on all Gabby's toys and turned them into really good gianty things. We had much better things than a hen that lays golden eggs. We had a teddy that gave us golden money, a monkey that laid golden bananas, a dolly that cried golden tears, and a golden dice that made everything 6 times more golden if you threw a 6. Except the trouble with 6s is they are a bit hard to get. So we changed it to 10 times more golden whatever number we threw. In about 5 minutes we were rich. The trouble with being rich is Gabby always wants to be richest. Gabby said she was definitely the richest giant because the magic monkey had laid a bigger bunch of golden bananas for her than for me. But I told her that the magic dolly who cried golden tears had done a ginormous teardrop for me, plus the teddy had given me a whole bank full of golden money. Which made me the richest. Then we started arguing again. The trouble with arguing again is it made Gabby's dad come into the bedroom. When he looked round the door at us, he did a giant huff and puff and said, "What now?" I don't think he was pretending to be a giant, his huff and puff just came out that size. Before I could say anything, Gabby said I wasn't being fair. She'd let me be the biggest giant and now I wanted to be the richest giant as well. Which wasn't true. It's not my fault if the magic dolly did bigger golden tears for me. Or if the magic teddy had been to the bank. But Gabby's dad folded his arms and did another giant huff and puff. Then he went on Gabby's side and asked me if I wouldn't mind letting Gabby be the richest giant, seeing as I was the tallest giant. So I had to say yes. She could be the richest giant, but only by half a golden banana. Chapter 5. Once we'd sorted out who was the richest giant and who was the tallest giant, we got on really well. Gabby changed her name to Mary the Massive and I changed mine to Tina the Terrifically Tall. Gabby's dad said he'd never heard of a lady giant before, and he was sure a lady giant would be much scarier than a man giant. But he was wrong. Lady giants aren't scary at all. Lady giants are really beautiful. And really kind. The trouble with man giants is they look really ugly and fierce. So everyone gets scared of them. In Mrs. Peters' stories, normal-sized people run away from man giants all the time. That's because the man giant always has hairs coming out of his nose and his ears, plus he has bobbly bits all over his face too. And wonky teeth. If man giants wore makeup or had proper washes with proper soap, or went to the dentist and brushed their hair a bit more, they'd probably look much nicer. Then everyone wouldn't run away. Gabby says it's because giants are so big that people run away from them. But she's wrong. Because people don't run away from trees, do they? And they're one of the biggest things you can get. Someone else who is big and fierce in Mrs. Peters' stories is the troll. The trouble with trolls is they don't live anywhere nearly as nice as a castle in the sky. Trolls live under smelly old bridges. The trouble with living under smelly old bridges is it makes you smell smelly and old too. It makes you smell of seaweed and fish, plus if the river floods, you're going to get really wet socks. The trouble with wet socks is they really smell. Especially smelly old trolls' wet socks. If I'd been a billy goat gruff, I'd have waited till the river flooded to cross the bridge safely. I'd have sneaked up to the bridge and quickly poured loads of shampoo and bubble bath into the river. That way the shampoo and bubbles would have cleaned the troll who was hiding underneath, plus when the water got really high, the soap suds would have gone right into his eyes so he couldn't see. If a troll can't see you, it's easy peasy lemon squeezy to cross his bridge without being eaten. Trouble is, I'm not sure if billy goats use shampoo. Princesses who live in towers do. Mrs. Peters told us about one in a fairy story. Her name was Rapunzel, which is a really bad name for a princess. And really long too. But not as long as her hair. Rapunzel's hair was the longest in the world. Which means she must have been an expert on shampoos. Whenever she let her hair down to let princes climb up to see her, it was always really nice and golden and shiny. It never had any tangles ever. The trouble with tangles is they really hurt. Especially if your mom yanks too hard with the hairbrush. I'm not sure if the princess in the tower had a mom. If she did, she didn't live there. The princess had to do all her own washing and brushing and hair drying. So she must have known a lot about shampoos. And conditioners. My mom always makes me have shampoo and conditioner. I still sometimes get tangles though. In our bathroom in our castle in the sky, Gabby and me had a cupboard full of giant bathroom things. Including bubble bath that made bubbles the size of the world. We had giant singing soap, giant musical toothbrushes and giant cotton buds that did a dance when you clicked your fingers. Except the trouble with clicking your fingers is Gabby can't do it. So we clapped our hands instead. I was the loudest clapper and Gabby was second loudest. Except she said her claps were the giantest. But we decided not to argue about it. I definitely had the biggest lipstick though. My giant lipstick was 100 meters long. The trouble with giant lipsticks is once you've done your lips there is still loads left over. So after we'd made ourselves look really beautiful, we used them to decorate the castle. Gabby colored the castle walls orange with her lipstick, and I colored the castle roof red with mine. But even once we'd colored all the doors and floors too, we still had some giant lipstick left over. So we colored the dungeon in as well. Once our lipsticks had run out, we were really hungry again. So we ate some chocolate skyscrapers. Chocolate skyscrapers are a giant's favorite sweet. They look like chocolate flakes, but they're as big as the actual skyscrapers you see on telly. Gabby said she wished a real giant would eat a chocolate skyscraper right above her house. Then when he bit into it, giant crumbs would crumble off, fall through the clouds and land right in her back garden. Then we'd have all the chocolate we could ever want. For life. I said I'd rather the giant bought a giant strawberry dib-dab and then sneezed on it. Then all the sherbet would die out of the giant packet, fall through the clouds and cover our gardens like snow. We could play snowballs with sherbet. If it would roll into a ball. Gabby said a giant's sherbet wouldn't roll into a ball. Unless his sneeze had made it really sticky. That's the trouble with giant's sherbet. You go off it after that. Chapter 6. After we'd eaten our chocolate skyscrapers, we were still hungry, so we decided we'd cook a giant omelet. The trouble with giant omelets is you need 3 zillion eggs to cook one. For our recipe, we needed 100 lorries of milk and 10 shops of butter too. But luckily we'd been shopping, so we had everything we needed in our giant fridge. You should have seen the size of the bowl we used to mix everything up in. It was bigger than a football stadium. And you should have seen the size of the spoons we used for whisking. Gabby's wooden spoon was 80 tree trunks long and mine was 81. But I didn't tell her. The trouble with making a giant omelet is all that giant whisking makes you really thirsty. So, after every 3 whisks, I drank a swimming pool of lemonade. And Gabby drank a swimming pool of cherry Coke. It was Gabby who did a giant burp first though, not me. I said she shouldn't do giant burps because her mom and dad might hear us and come and tell us off. But they didn't hear us. So I did some giant burps too. Gabby did thunder burps, which are really loud. I did volcano burps, which are even louder. But the trouble with volcano burps is mine started an earthquake above the clouds. Everything in our magic castle started to shake. Including me and Gabby. I shook all the way out of the castle kitchen, past the giant omelet bowl, out of the front door and nearly into the dungeon. Gabby shook all the way past the giant fridge, bumped into the omelet bowl, tipped it over and accidentally covered herself in giant omelet mixture. Which meant she looked like a giant omelet herself. Fifofum, she said in a married the massive voice. I'm a massive omelet, yum, yum, yum. Then she started walking round the magic castle doing giant omelet noises. So then I tried to eat her. The trouble with trying to eat a giant omelet with legs is they never let you catch them. I chased Gabby out of the castle, down the hallway, through her mom and dad's bedroom, down the stairs and right the way into the lounge. I chased her twice round the settee and 3 times round the armchairs, but still couldn't catch her. Until she tripped over the wastepaper bin and nearly hit her head on the telly. That's when her mom told us it was time for lunch. Chapter 7. The trouble with magic baked beans on toast is there's no such thing. Gabby's mom and dad said there might be, but they don't really understand about giants. Or magic beans. A magic bean would never work if it was covered in tomato sauce. When I was having baked beans on toast at Gabby's, her dad said the magic bean in Jack and the beanstalk might have been a baked bean, but no, it definitely wasn't. The magic bean in Jack and the beanstalk was bigger and shinier. Mrs. Peters showed us a picture of it in class. I really wish there was such a thing as magic baked beans, then I wouldn't have got into trouble at Nanny and Grampy's today. Mom could have just gone to the supermarket this morning and bought me a whole tin full of magic baked beans. Then I could have washed the tomato sauce off and grown as many magic beanstalks as I wanted. Gabby told her dad to stop being silly about magic baked beans or we would both put a giant spell on him. Gabby's mom asked if we could turn him into a handsome prince, but we said no, we would turn him into something much more horrible, Gabby wanted to turn him into a giant slug, but I said we should turn him into a giant pea. Then roll him down a mountain. Or off a cliff. Gabby's dad left the table after that. The trouble with Gabby's mom is she doesn't know anything about giants either. When we asked her if she'd ever heard of a lady giant, she said she hadn't, but she was sure they must be out there somewhere. She said there must be lady giants, otherwise all the man giants wouldn't have any clothes to wear. The trouble with giants' clothes is they are absolutely huge. Their socks are about 20 meters long, their vests are about the size of 100 bed covers, and their shirts are big enough to cover a whole town. Gabby's mom said it would probably take her 2 weeks to iron one pair of giant's trousers. 3 weeks if he wanted a crease in both legs. Elle said I didn't think lady giants did ironing. If giants have got magic harps that sing to them and hens that lay golden eggs for them, then they're bound to have magic ironing boards that do all their ironing for them too. Gabby's mum said if we ever got to meet a lady giant, could we ask her if she could borrow her magic ironing board once a week? And if she had a magic tea towel, could she borrow that too? We said we'd ask, but the trouble with lady giants is they're even harder to meet than man giants. Especially if you haven't got a magic bean. Chapter 8. The trouble with not having a magic bean is it's impossible to grow a magic beanstalk if you haven't got one. If you haven't got a magic beanstalk, then you'll never get all the way up into the clouds. If you can't get all the way up to the clouds, then you'll never get to see a real giant's castle. When Gabby and me went into the garden after our baked beans on toast, we could see the clouds high up in the sky above us, but we couldn't get anywhere near high enough to see through them. I got my eyes up to the top of Gabby's fence, but Gabby's legs started to wobble, so she had to put me down. Gabby said there was only one thing for it. We would have to find a magic bean of our own. So we stopped playing giants for a while and went on a magic bean hunt. The trouble with looking for magic beans is you should really have a cow with you. If you have a cow with you like in Jack and the Beanstalk, then old ladies will just come straight up to you and say, "Hey, that's a nice cow you've got there. Would you like to swap it for some magic beans?" First of all we checked the flower beds for cows. But there weren't any. Then we looked in the bushes for old ladies. But there weren't any of those either. The only thing that was old in Gabby's garden was some moldy birdseed hanging from a wire thing in her tree. Gabby said that in winter her mom puts nice new birdseed in the wire thing so the birds can get something to eat when it's snowing. Trouble is, the birds can't get their beaks right down to the bottom of the wire thing, so some of the birdseed goes moldy. That's the trouble with birds' beaks. They aren't long enough in winter. Once we hadn't found any cows or old ladies, we looked for farmers. Because farmers sometimes have cows and an old farmer might know an old lady. But the trouble with looking for young or old farmers in Gabby's back garden is it needs to be a farm really. Farms have loads of farmers and loads of cows. Gabby's garden doesn't. Gabby's garden doesn't even have a small cat like Tiptoes. There is grass in Gabby's back garden and I'm sure cows would really like it if they knew where it was, but Gabby's garden doesn't have a back gate either. So even if the cows knew where Gabby's grass was, they'd never be able to get in. Neither would old ladies with magic beans. Unless they came in through the front door of Gabby's house, like I did. But I don't think Gabby's mom and dad would like that. Especially the cows. Gabby said there might be some magic beans in her dad's shed. But there was only a dartboard and a lawnmower. And neither of them were magic. There were no magic beans under the sun lounger, no magic beans in the watering can, no magic beans in the flower pots, none in the flower beds, none on the patio, none on the window ledges, none near the fish pond and none anywhere else in Gabby's garden. It was so frustrating. We really wanted to find a magic bean. But we couldn't find one anywhere. So we went back to pretending to be giants instead. Chapter 9. The trouble with playing giants outside in the garden is you're not allowed to use Gabby's pillows. Gabby's mom said Gabby's pillows belonged on her bed and we weren't allowed to put them on the lawn because we would make them dirty. So we had to put them back. The trouble with putting pillows back is it means you don't have any white fluffy clouds. Gabby's mom said we could use sun lounger cushions as clouds if we wanted to, but Gabby's sun lounger cushions are green with swirly flowers on. So they didn't look very good. Then Gabby had a brilliant idea. Instead of pretending we were giants living in a castle high up in the sky, we could pretend we had come down the beanstalk and were giants living on the ground. So we did. I came down the beanstalk first because I was the best climber downer, but I didn't tell Gabby, and then Gabby came down next. Then we took it in turns to think of giant things to do. First of all, we went shopping. If you're going shopping and you've got giant legs, you can step over anything. Gabby stepped straight over her garden fence and marched all the way down the road to the shopping precinct. Because my legs were slightly longer, it meant I could step right over Gabby's house. So I did. Then I marched all the way down the road to the shopping precinct. It was brilliant. Plus I got there just before Gabby did too. The shopping precinct is where our mums go to do the shopping. But we didn't take our mums, because they're too teensy. The trouble with being a teensy mum is you might get trodden on just like that. I wouldn't want to squash my mum. Even if she did tell me off at Nanny and Grampy's today. So we went to the shops on our own. The first place we went shopping in the shopping precinct was the toy shop. You should have seen all the teensy people's faces when we bent down and pulled the roof of the toy shop right off. They weren't scared because we had nice lipstick on, but they were really surprised. Everyone pointed up at us and said, "Wow, look at those beautiful giants. They're enormous." Then the toy shop owner came out and said, "Can I help you, beautiful giants?" "Yes," said Wendy the Whopping, which was Gabby's new pretend giant's name. "Yes, you can help us, Mr. Toy Shop Owner. We would like to buy all of your toys." "All of them?" said the toy shop owner. "Yes," said Wendy, "all of them. And here's enough golden bananas to pay for them." Then we scooped all of the toys in the shop into a giant carrier bag and went down the road to somewhere else. "Fee-fi-fo-fum," I said in a really loud giant's voice. "I want to buy some bubble gum." You should have seen everyone's faces when we lifted the roof off the sweet shop. All the teensy children inside hid behind the sweet shop counter when they saw us, but then they realized we were friendly, so they came out. "How much bubble gum do you want?" asked the sweet shop owner. "All of it," I said. "All of it?" he said. "Yes, all of it," I said. "And all of your chocolate," said Wendy the Whopping, "and all of your DIB dabs," said Hannah the Highest, which was me, because I'd changed my name as well. "In fact, Mr. Sweet Shop Owner," I said, "give us all of your sweets." All the teensy-weensy children in the sweet shop groaned, and the sweet shop owner fell down on his knees. "But how will you pay me?" he cried. "In golden bananas," shouted. "In golden bananas and whopping golden dollies' tears." "But we won't have any sweets if you eat them all," said all the teensy children. "Please leave some sweets for us." When we looked down, we realized that some of the teensy children were our friends from school. So, because we were really kind giants as well as beautiful ones, we gave a free bag of sweets to all the children in the shop. Apart from Jack Beachwhistle. I picked Jack Beachwhistle up by his ear and threw him 100 miles into the air, right through the clouds, right into our castle and right into our dungeon. "Where shall we go next, Hannah the Highish?" said Wendy the Whopping. "Highest, not highish," I roared. "Next we'll go to the swimming pool." Chapter 10. The trouble with swimming pools is the doors are nowhere near big enough for a giant to get in. So we had to pull the roof off that too. You should have seen everyone's faces when we looked down on all the teensy swimmers. They all went, "Wow." And then they started to shiver. Not because they were frightened, but because they were getting cold. That's the trouble with giants pulling the roof off swimming pools. All the people inside get goosebumps. "Put the roof back on, please," shivered all the teensy swimmers. "It's freezing in here." "I'm afraid we can't," shouted back. "If we don't take the roof off the swimming pool, we can't come in for a paddle." Then everyone screamed and got out of the swimming pool fast. First Wendy the Whopping took her tights off, and then Hannah the Highest took her socks off. Then we hung them over the top diving board to stop them from getting wet. Then we got in. And guess what? The deep end only came up to our ankles. Once all the teensy swimmers realized that we were really kind giants, they got back into the pool. Liberty Pierce did handstands off my fingernail into the water, and Dylan did 100-meter dive bombs off Wendy the Whopping's shoulders. It was brilliant. When we left the swimming pool, all the children really thanked us, plus then we put the roof back on so they didn't get goosebumps anymore. Wendy the Whopping said it was a good job she hadn't got thirsty, or she might have had to drink the swimming pool water instead of paddling in it. I said that wasn't a very good idea. The trouble with drinking swimming pool water is someone might have weed in it. My mom says some children wee in swimming pools without anyone knowing. She said some swimming pools can get invisible wee germs in them, and that you have to be really careful not to let the water go in your mouth when you're swimming. Wendy the Whopping said giants are far too giant to be got by a teensy weensy wee germ. But my mom says germs don't care if you're big or small. If you let them get inside you, they will get you big time. That's why you must always keep your mouth shut when you're swimming. After our giant paddle, me and Wendy the Whopping went for a rest. The trouble with giants resting is you should have seen everyone's faces when we lay down in the park. Wendy the Whopping's body stretched from the boating lake right across to the swings on the other side of the park. My body stretched from the boating lake right across to the slide, which is just a bit further than the swings. The trouble with giants being so big is when you lie down in the park, it means the park keeper can't mow the grass properly. Which means he either has to go over you, or around you. The park keeper in our park went over us, which really tickled our tummies. The trouble with ticklish giants is if they laugh too loud, anything can happen. Buildings can fall down, the church steeple can fall off, all the leaves can fall off the trees, and all the squirrels will fall off their branches. That's exactly what happened in our park. Plus the park keeper's false teeth fell out. So we had to get up and go somewhere else, because he was really cross. Wendy the Whopping said the cinema would be a good place to go, but I said when we pulled the roof off, all the light would get in and we wouldn't be able to see the film. That's the trouble with films at the cinema. You have to watch them in the dark. So I said, let's go somewhere we've never been before. Let's go somewhere really different. Follow me, I said. To the Car Crushers. Chapter 11. My mom says that when cars get really old and won't work anymore, they go to a place to be crushed. That's where our red car went before we got our new second-hand green one. To the Car Crushers. My mom says at the Car Crushers there's a big tall crane that picks up the broken cars and drops them into a great big crusher thingy that crushes and squeezes the broken car until it doesn't look like a car anymore. It looks like a great big metal sugar lump. It takes lots of super strong power to crush a car into a sugar lump. Unless you're a giant. You should have seen everyone's faces when we turned up at the Car Crushers. Giants don't need cranes to pick up cars, I said. We're Hannah the Highest and Wendy the Whopping, and we can pick up cars just like this. Everyone at the car crushers watched in amazement as I put down my shopping bags and picked up our old red car in both hands. Giants don't need a car crushing thingy to crush cars with either, said. I can do it with my fingers just like this. Then all the teensy people who worked at the car crushers watched in amazement as I crushed our old red car into a sugar lump shape with my bare hands. As the car squashed inside my fingers, loads of rust fell off it and sprinkled like pepper onto all the people below. But we didn't eat anyone. We just took it in turns to crush cars with our bare hands instead. Crushing cars with your hands is brilliant. Wendy the Whopping crushed 2,050 cars in hers. And I crushed 2,051 in mine. Plus an army tank. Everyone at the car crushers thought we were the best car crushers ever, because we squashed everything much smaller than they ever could have done. Plus their car crusher thingy couldn't do army tanks. The trouble with crushing army tanks with your bare hands is it gives you giant splinters. So we went to the doctors next. You should have seen everyone's faces when we pulled the roof off the doctor's surgery. The doctor nearly fainted when he saw us. What seems to be the problem? He said to us. We've got giant car splinters, said Wendy. And I've got a really giant tank splinter, I said. Then you'll have to go to the hospital, said the doctor. The hospital's tweezers are much bigger than mine. I only do teensy people's splinters. So we put the roof back on the doctors and went to the hospital. You should have seen everyone's faces when we walked down the high street. You should have seen everyone's faces when we pulled the roof off the hospital. One patient with a broken leg was so surprised to see us, he fell out of bed. Trouble is, he didn't have a broken leg until he fell out of bed. He only had a sore throat. All the teensy doctors and nurses in the hospital came running down the corridors to see us. They gave us giant x-rays, and then 100 doctors lifted some giant tweezers and pulled our splinters out. Then we felt better. So we went to the ice cream parlor. You should have seen the look on the lady's face when we pulled the roof off her shop. What flavor would you like? She asked. All of them, I said. Except rum and raisin, said Wendy the Whopping. Wendy the Whoppings don't like rum and raisin. Hannah the Highests do. Hannah the Highests like every type of ice cream. All at once. The trouble with ice cream parlors is normal scoops are far too small for a giant. I think I'll need a bigger scoop, said the ice cream parlor lady. Leave it to me, I said, walking to America and pulling a great big satellite dish off one of their rocket launching stations. You can fit loads of ice cream in this, I said, getting back from America really quickly because giants can do really big steps. Here, use this for a giant ice cream bowl. The trouble with giant ice cream bowls is you need loads and loads of ice cream to fill them. The ice cream parlor lady only had about 12 normal-sized tubs in her freezer, which wasn't nearly enough ice cream at all. We must walk to the North Pole, said Wendy the Whopping. There's a giant ice cream factory there. So we did. But we didn't take the ice cream parlor lady with us. Because she was too teensy and she wouldn't have been able to keep up. You should have seen Wendy the Whopping's face when I pulled the roof off the ice cream factory. Instead of teensy people, there were loads of teensy polar bears looking up. They all wore aprons and hats that said ice cream factory on them. Wendy the Whopping didn't know polar bears made ice cream. I did. When the polar bears saw that we were kind and beautiful giants, they offered to make us a special giant-sized ice cream each. I had an orange lolly that was 100 meters long and Wendy the Whopping had a cone with a chocolate flake in it as big as a tree. The polar bears said that all their ice creams were free to giants and that we could have another one if we wanted. But we told them that we had to get back to England pretty soon. I got back to England first and Wendy the Whopping got back to England second. Then we had a race to see who could get back to Gabby's back garden first. Gabby took 10 seconds, but I took 5 because I knew a shortcut over some really tall buildings. Gabby said I couldn't have taken 5 seconds because walking from England to her back garden in 5 seconds was impossible. Which means she was jealous again. But I didn't say anything because I didn't want to hurt her feelings. Then she said I wasn't allowed to be the highest and the strongest and the fastest giant as well. So I said if she let me be the highest and the strongest and the fastest giant, next time we went to the North Pole she could have the nicest, excitingest, giantest ice cream. But she said she had already had the nicest, excitingest, giantest ice cream because cones with ice cream and flakes in are better than boring old lollies. So I said lollies weren't boring. But she said lollies were boring, especially orange lollies. So I said mine wasn't normal orange, it was fizzy giant orange made to a special fizzy giant recipe. So she said her flake had special giant sprinkles on it that changed flavor when you put them in your mouth. Then I said my lolly had special giant sprinkles on too, but they were inside the lolly, so you couldn't see them. Then she said I didn't. So then I said I did. And then she said I didn't. And then I said I did. And then Gabby's dad said my mom had just rung and that it was time for me to go home. So we had to stop arguing about ice creams after that. And we had to stop pretending to be giants too. Which was probably a good thing. Because Gabby was obviously getting tired. Chapter 12. When I got home from Gabby's house, my mom asked if I'd had a good time. I said apart from Gabby being a bit jealous, we had a brilliant time and that pretending to be giants was the best thing on earth. Said Pleassse, could Gabby come with us to Nanny and Grampy's, because we still had loads more giant games we needed to play. I so wish Mum had said yes, because I'm sure I wouldn't have got into trouble at Nanny and Grampy's house if I'd had Gabby to play with. Well, at least not that much trouble. Trouble is, she didn't say yes. She said no. She said Gabby and I could play giants again at school on Monday instead. I said Mrs. Peters wouldn't let us. But Mum said she didn't mean in the actual classroom during lessons. She meant we could play giants in the school playground at break time. Which is nowhere near long enough to play giants. That's the trouble with break times at school. They're about 5 hours too short. So I said, double PLEASE, can Gabby come with us to Nanny and Grampy's? And then Sil said, triple PLEASE, can Gabby come with us? Then tried a giant triple doppel PLEASE, can Gabby come with us? But Mum did one of her no faces. There would be only 2 people going to Nanny and Grampy's for Sunday lunch this weekend. One would be my mom. One would be me. And none would be Gabby. Which wasn't my fault. Chapter 13. When I went to bed that night, Mum promised she would read me a story. We didn't have Jack and the Beanstalk, so she read me Little Red Riding Hood instead. The trouble with Little Red Riding Hood is she was little. If Little Red Riding Hood had been Big Red Riding Hood or, even better, Giant Red Riding Hood, the wolf would never have tried to eat her in the first place. Even if the wolf had been really, really hungry, there's no way a normal-sized wolf could eat a Giant Red Riding Hood. He wouldn't even have enough room for her little toe. That's the trouble with wolves in fairy stories. They are always trying to eat people. Like the 3 little pigs. You see, they were little as well. If the 3 little pigs had been the 3 giant pigs, their houses would have been far too big for a wolf to blow down. Even the house made out of straw. If Hansel and Gretel had been giant children, they could have eaten the candy house and the witch all in one go. If you ask me, the trouble with fairy stories is there are too many little people in them and not enough giants. Especially giant pigs and giant children. After Mom had finished reading me my bedtime story, I did the giantest yawn I'd ever done in my whole life. Not on purpose. It just came out. Mom gave me a giant kiss goodnight and told me to have a dream about going to Sunday lunch at a giant nanny and Grampy's. She said to imagine how much bigger than the mountains the roast potatoes would be, and how high into the sky the Yorkshire puddings would rise. So I did. But by the time I got to the carrots, I think I must have fallen asleep. Chapter 14. When I woke up this morning, the first thing I thought of was giants. The second thing I thought of was the loo. I was busting for a wee. It must have been all those swimming pools of lemonade I drank when I was a giant yesterday. After I'd flushed the loo and washed my hands and gone downstairs, I saw my mom was already in the kitchen. Which is really unusual for a Sunday. On Sundays, my mom usually lies in bed until at least 10 o'clock. Because she's really lazy. But this morning she got up early to make a banoffee pie to take to Nanny's. The trouble with banoffee pies is I really like the toffee and the cream and the biscuit, but I'm not too keen on the bananas. Bananas are alright, but I'd much rather Mom left the bananery bits out. Then it would be perfect. Mom said that without the bananery bits it wouldn't be a banoffee pie at all. It would be an offee pie. And no one ever went to someone's for Sunday lunch with an offee pie. Especially a nanny and Grampy's. I said Nanny and Grampy wouldn't know we'd left the bananery bits out, because the bananery bits were hidden under the cream. But Mom said they would know. Especially when they bit into it and tasted no banana. That's the trouble with banana. It tastes too much like banana. So the bananery bits had to go in. While Mom was making the toffee for the toffee bit of the pie, I had my breakfast. The trouble with breakfast is no one does real boulders in a packet. Sol had to pretend my Rice Krispies were giant boulders instead. Every time I crunched, I imagined a giant mouthful of rocks crumbling between my teeth. After I'd finished my boulders, I washed it all down with a lake full of cold milk and then went upstairs again to brush my giant teeth. Then I started missing Gabby. If Gabby had been allowed to knock for me this morning, we could have played giants in my back garden at least until I left to go to Nanny and Grampy's. We might even have found a magic bean. We could have grown our own beanstalk, changed our names again to something even more gianty, and gone on even more giant adventures, plus taken my pillows off my bed and taken them outside. Well, maybe not outside, but somewhere quite near the back door. If Gabby had come round to my house this morning, we could have played all sorts of giant games. But she didn't. So we couldn't. So I went back to being normal-sized again. And then I started getting really bored. The trouble with being normal-sized and bored is there's nothing anyone can do about it. You just have to sit in a chair and be normal-sized and bored until it's time to go out. You can get out of the chair if you want, but even if you do, you'll still be normal-sized and bored. You can be normal-sized and bored looking out of a window, normal-sized and bored sitting on your bed, normal-sized and bored lying on the sofa. The only time this morning that I was normal-sized and not that bored was when I went into my back garden on my own without Gabby to look for magic beans again. But I couldn't find any. So I went back to being bored again. I was still normal-sized when I went out into the garden. By the time my mom had told me to get into our new second-hand car, my eyebrows had nearly dropped off. I was so bored. But when we arrived outside my Nanny and Grampy's house, I suddenly started to feel better. Chapter 15. The trouble with suddenly starting to feel better is it makes your mom think that you weren't really bored in the first place. That's the trouble with going to Nanny and Grampy's. It makes people think you're a fibber. When we got out of the car, Elle changed my face to half bored and half excited, but by the time I got to the front door it had gone all excited again. I love going to my Nanny and Grampy's for Sunday lunch. I love the smell of gravy when we walk in, and the sound of their electric carving knife. Except, when Grampy opened the door of his house today, there wasn't the smell of gravy or the sound of a knife. There was the smell of burning and the sound of scraping. Nanny had burned the Yorkshire puddings. When we got inside, Grampy shut the front door and told us that they had bought a new cooker. Not a new second-hand cooker. A new cooker. They must be rich. The trouble with buying a new cooker is it takes a while to get used to all the new knobs and new switches. Especially if you're as old as my nanny. When we went into the kitchen, Nanny was standing by the cooker waving smoke everywhere with an oven glove. She had burned the Yorkshires, and the roast potatoes, and all the vegetables too, including the carrots, which is a real shame because carrots are really nice. Especially covered in Nanny's gravy. Nanny said lunch had been slightly delayed and that she would have to do all the vegetables and all the Yorkshire puddings again. Mum said not to worry, and that we would be quite happy to not have any Yorkshire puddings and vegetables at all. But Nanny said, Sunday lunch without Yorkshire puddings and vegetables? Not in my house. Then she said that lunch would be another hour at least, so we might as well all go outside into the garden to get away from the smoke. And then she hit the oven with her oven glove. Honest. Nanny told the oven right off. The trouble with hitting ovens with oven gloves is ovens don't know you're telling them off. Because ovens are metal. Then Nanny called it a stupid oven. Which wouldn't work because ovens don't have ears either. So they can't hear you. Mum said she would stay in the kitchen and help Nanny scrape the burned Yorkshire puddings out of the tray. Grampy said he would go into the garden and pick some more runner beans. Yup. I couldn't believe it either. That's exactly what he said. Runner beans, said. Runner beans. Have you got real runner beans in your garden, Grampy? And you'll never guess what Grampy said. He said, yes. Chapter 16. Can I help? Can I help? Said. Can help you pick some runner beans? And guess what? Grampy said I could. He took a bowl out of the kitchen cupboard and said to me, come on then, Daisy. Fresh runner beans are delicious. You pick some from the bottom and I'll pick some from the top. Then I followed him out of the kitchen and into the garden. The trouble with my Grampy's garden is it can make you get quite excited. Especially as it's got beans in it. It's much bigger than my garden and has a bird bath and a vegetable garden and even a greenhouse. My Grampy's vegetables were over by the fence near the greenhouse. Sometimes you could see where the actual vegetables were growing. Like if they were tomatoes, because tomatoes grow above the ground. And sometimes you couldn't see where the actual vegetables were growing. Like potatoes and carrots. Because potatoes and carrots grow under the ground. Welcome to my vegetable garden, Daisy, said Grampy, showing me where it was. These are my tomatoes and these are my spring onions, these are my new potatoes, those are my carrots, these are my lettuces and these are my runner beans. Nanny and I grow all our own vegetables, said Grampy. The tomatoes are green at the moment because they aren't ripe yet, but they'll be a lovely red color in a month or so. Grampy was really pleased with his vegetables. He said vegetables are fresher and tastier if you grow them in your own garden. Much fresher and tastier than if you buy them in a shop. Then I asked Grampy if he would show me the runner beans. And guess what? The runner beans weren't growing in nice straight rows at all. They were growing up towards the sky on sticks. Grampy called them bamboo sticks. He had pushed them into the ground just like an Indian teepee. Grampy said runner beans grow up, and that the bamboo sticks gave them something to hold on to. I told Grampy that I knew a lot about beans because I had listened to Jack and the Beanstalk at school. I told him Gabby and me had spent the whole day yesterday playing giants and that we had spent ages and ages looking for a magic bean of our own. But we couldn't find any beans anywhere. Apart from baked beans at lunchtime. But they were covered in tomato sauce. Well, you'd better get picking, Daisy, said Grampy. We'll need at least 20 nice big runner beans for our Sunday lunch. So I did. I picked my first ever actual runner bean. With my own fingers. Grampy showed me how to do it first. He showed me how to lift up the leaves and look for the long green dangly things that were hidden underneath. Then he pulled one off the stalk, slid his fingernail down the joint at the side of the long green case, and pulled it open with the rest of his fingers. You should have seen what was inside. It wasn't just one runner bean. It was 5. 5 lovely, shiny, pink runner beans, with little black and brown dots and splodges on them. Each bean was all snuggledy-puggledy inside its own smooth little dip, but if you pushed it with your thumb, it came out. Grampy pushed a shiny pink bean out with his thumb and then gave it to me to hold. Is it magic? I said. I doubt it, he said. So then I had a really good close-up look. It felt magic. And it was definitely shiny, but it wasn't exactly sparkly. In fact, it wasn't sparkly at all. So it can't have been magic. Then I looked at all the other beans that were inside the case. None of them were magic either. Can we pick some more? I asked. Pick away, laughed Grampy. We need 19 more big ones for lunch. So this time I got to pick my very own. Grampy reached up to the very top of the bamboo sticks and I reached about up to the middle. That's the trouble with being about 7 years old. It doesn't make you about 7 feet tall. I couldn't wait to open up my own beans. The first one I opened had 5 shiny beans in. And the second one I opened had 6. But none of them were sparkly. Which meant that none of them were magic either. It was still really good though, because I'd never opened beans before. Only then Grampy went and spoiled it. He asked me not to open any more. Grampy said you're not meant to open runner beans if you're having them for Sunday lunch. You're supposed to leave them inside their green cases. The trouble with not opening runner beans is you can't tell if there are any magic beans inside. But Grampy still said, just pick them please, Daisy. Don't open them please, Daisy. So I had to just pick them. And not open them. Not even one. Which was totally Grampy's fault. After about 10 minutes we had 21 lovely long runner beans in our bowl. I really wanted to open them all, but Grampy said we must take them indoors and give them all to Nanny. So we did. Because he made me. Chapter 17. Didn't want to give the runner beans to Nanny. Especially the ones I'd picked. I wanted to keep them for myself. I didn't mind giving them to her once LD opened them because then I could have checked to see if there were any magic beans inside. But Grampy made me give Nanny all the beans. Every one. Nanny said we had done really well, and that as soon as she had whisked up her New Yorkshire pudding mix, she would top, tail and slice them ready for lunch. Then Grampy and Mum started talking. Then Nanny started whisking. So I went back outside into the garden. The trouble with going into a garden after you've been picking beans is it really makes you want to pick some more. I mean, we had only picked about 20 in the first place, and there were still loads more dangling from the leaves. There were long ones, short ones, thin ones, fat ones, big ones, little ones. Any one of them could have had a magic bean inside. So I went back to the bamboo sticks and picked all the long ones I could reach. I must have picked about 50 long ones before I had to start picking all the medium-sized ones. Each time I pulled a runner bean from its stalk, I opened the green case and looked for a magic bean sparkling inside. Trouble is, every bean I looked at just looked the same. Apart from the medium beans. They were just smaller. So I had to pick all of Grampy's small beans too. But they didn't have any sparkly beans in either. Some of them didn't even shine. The really titchy ones didn't have any beans in at all. Which only left the beans I couldn't reach. So I went and got Grampy's wheelbarrow. The trouble with standing in Grampy's wheelbarrow is it does make you able to reach higher, but if you lean over too far, it makes the wheelbarrow tip over. Into the beans. I was doing really well too. I only had one more bean to reach, but it was right under some leaves and really hard to get to, so I really had to stretch and stretch and then the wheelbarrow fell over into the beans. With me in it. The trouble with falling into beans is all the bamboo sticks fall over when you land on them and everything crashes to the ground. At first I thought I was going to break something like my arm or my leg, but I didn't. The only things I broke were Grampy's sticks. And some of his stalks. Actually quite a lot of the stalks. But I was all right. And the wheelbarrow was all right too. When I had got up out of the beans, I looked across the garden towards the kitchen. The kitchen door was open, and I could see Mum and Grampy still talking. But no one came out. So they obviously didn't mind. So then I had a brilliant idea. If there wasn't a magic bean in Grampy's garden, maybe there was a magic tomato. After all, if you can climb up to the clouds on a magic beanstalk, I'm sure you can do it on a magic tomato stalk. So I picked all Grampy's tomatoes too. I didn't mean to. They just sort of kept coming off in my hand. But they didn't sparkle either. They just stayed green and not that shiny. And they made my fingers smell. So I needed to pick something else instead. To get the smell off. The trouble with magic carrots is the green bits at the top of them should sparkle. But they don't. You have to pull the whole carrot out of the ground to see if the orange bit is sparkling underneath. Even when you've pulled them out of the ground, you still can't tell straight away if they are magic or not, because the earth on them has to be rubbed off too. I rubbed the earth off every one of Grampy's carrots, but I still couldn't find one that even slightly sparkled. So I had to try his spring onions instead. The trouble with spring onions is you think there is going to be much more of them under the ground when you pull, but there isn't. I pulled up every single spring onion, but there was hardly any onion growing underneath, and none of them looked magic at all. There were only little white roots. Which isn't my fault. So that only left the new potatoes and the lettuces. The new potatoes were my favorite. When you pull them, all the earth comes up, and then it all sprinkles away to show you the potatoes underneath. Sometimes you get loads. They're quite small and creamy whitey colored, and when you pull them, they come off their roots just like that. If only they sparkled too. But they didn't. Not one single one of all Grampy's new potatoes was the slightest bit magic at all. And as for his lettuces, well, they were just useless. That's the trouble with Grampy's vegetable garden. None of the vegetables are grown from magic seeds. At least none of the vegetables I had looked at so far. I was almost going to give up looking when I suddenly had another good idea. Well, it seemed like a good idea at the time. I could look for magic vegetables in Grampy's greenhouse. So Elle did. Chapter 18. The trouble with greenhouses is they get really hot inside. When I pulled back the glass door on Grampy's greenhouse, loads of hot heat came out all over me. All the sunshine in the sky had made it hot enough inside to cook Yorkshire puddings in. And the smell was really funny too. It smelled of moldy flower pots. Once I'd let all the heat out, the smell started to go away. Then I started to get used to it. So I started looking for magic vegetables again. There were lots of things growing in Grampy's greenhouse. They were all in trays with brown earth inside them, but I couldn't tell if they were vegetables or not. Because they were so small. Which wasn't my fault. Some had little things like cucumbers on them, plus big green leaves with yellow flowers. Some trays had loads and loads and loads of teensy green leaves on teensy weensy white stalks. Those were the ones I pulled up first. You should have seen how easy they were to pull up. I could do 10 at once really easily. They just came right out in my hands, but none of them had sparkly roots below. The little cucumbers didn't sparkle when I pulled them off either. Neither did the roots in the black trays, the red trays, or even the flower pots when I tipped them upside down. It was hopeless. There wasn't a magic vegetable anywhere. Nothing in Grampy's greenhouse sparkled at all. I had completely run out of ideas and vegetables. Until I looked through the glass. And saw the blackcurrants. Chapter 19. The trouble with blackcurrants is if you squeeze them too hard, they pop. Especially very ripe blackcurrants. At first I didn't know what a magic blackcurrant would be like, but then I worked it out. A magic blackcurrant was bound to have special powers, so if you squashed it, it wouldn't pop. So that's what I had to do. Squash all Grampy's blackcurrants. The trouble with squashing Grampy's blackcurrants is if they pop too much, they pop all over you. Like on your clothes. If your clothes are your best clothes, then you don't really want blackcurrant juice on them at all. Trouble is, I never noticed it was happening. I was too busy looking for the magic blackcurrant with special powers to notice. Which isn't my fault. The person who noticed first of all was my mom. "Daisy," she said. "Well," screamed more than said. "What on earth do you think you're doing?" So I said, "Looking for magic vegetables." Then my Grampy came out to see what Mum was shouting about. You should have seen his face when he saw what LD done. "My beans," he said. "My tomatoes," he said. "My carrots," he said. "My potatoes," he said. "My lettuces," he said. "My spring onions," he said. Then he went into the greenhouse. "My courgettes," he said. "My marrows," he said. "My seedlings," he said. Then he came out of the greenhouse. "My blackcurrants," he said. "Your best blouse," my mum said. Well, not said, but sort of shouted again. Then I looked down at my best blouse and saw the blackcurrant juice that had popped all over it. And then I went all sort of hot. And my fingers went all stiff. And my eyes went all watery. Then my nanny came out to see what everyone was shouting about. "My word," she said. "Daisy, whatever have you done?" The trouble with trying to explain about magic vegetables when your fingers are stiff and your eyes are watery is, well, you can't think of what to say. So I didn't say anything. At first. My mum did. My mum didn't stop saying things for ages. She said I was a naughty, naughty, naughty girl and that if I didn't say sorry to Grampy straight away, she would never bring me to Nanny and Grampy's for Sunday lunch again. Then my eyes went even waterier, and my tongue went all dry inside my mouth. The first time I said sorry, no one heard me because my words were so quiet. Then I said sorry again. A giant sorry. And then I started to cry. The trouble with crying is sometimes it's really hard to stop. Mom didn't care. She was far too cross to worry about my shoulders going up and down. She told me I had to help Grampy replant all the vegetables I had pulled up. But Grampy said the sunshine would have dried the roots, so they wouldn't go back into the ground. Then she said I would have to buy Grampy some more seeds out of my own pocket money and help him plant every single one. But Grampy said it was too late in the season to plant more seeds. He asked me why I had pulled up all his vegetables, and I told him that I needed a magic bean, but a magic tomato would have worked, but there weren't any magic beans or tomatoes in his garden, however hard I looked or however hard I wished, so then all the other vegetables had made me get carried away, and so it really wasn't my fault. Then he told me that if I was going to keep on crying, would I mind standing in the middle of the lawn, because if I stood in the middle of the lawn, LD make a lovely job of watering the grass. Which made me laugh a bit. And smile a bit. But I still felt ever so terrible. Because Grampy's vegetables looked ever so messy. And it was my fault really. Nanny said she had to go back indoors because if she burned the Yorkshires again, that would be 3 disasters in one day. Grampy said he'd plant some winter vegetables when he tidied up, and that maybe I'd like to help him when he bought the seeds. I didn't really want to help him, because LD gone right off vegetables forever. But I dried my eyes and promised I would. Mum gave me a tissue and told me to blow my nose. Then she banned me from playing giants forever. Including looking for magic beans. Looking for magic vegetables. Looking for magic fruit. Or looking for magic anythings. Then we went in for our lunch. It was a very quiet Sunday lunch. No one hardly said anything. We just chewed. And then we tidied away. And then Mom and me went home. Chapter 20. When we got indoors, I went straight up to my room. Promise me you won't play giants again, Daisy, said Mom. So I promised. I mean it, Daisy, said my mom. If I hear so much as a fee, a fi, a fo, or a fum out of you, you are going to be in giant trouble. So I double promised. Closed my bedroom door. Sat on my bed. Uncrossed my fingers. Accidentally knocked my pillows onto the floor. Turned them into clouds. Picked up my 100-meter blue biro. And wrote a secret letter to Jack Beachwhistle. A secret letter to Jack Beachwhistle Castle in the sky above the clouds. Dear Jack, no one must know I'm writing this letter, because my mum will go mad if she finds out. I'm writing to you to tell you some bad news. My mum says I'm banned from being a giant anymore, which means so is Wendy the Whopping. Because being giants in the first place was my idea, so she's not allowed to play it without me. I'm a bit sad, because being giants was really good fun. Especially the bit when I picked you up out of the sweet shop and threw you into the dungeon of our castle in the sky. I reckon my mum will let me be a giant again one day, when she has calmed me down a bit. But it may be quite a long time. Giant dungeon keys are very massive, which means they can only be picked up by giants. So I won't be able to let you out again until I'm a giant again. Which is even more bad news. Because you'll have to stay in the dungeon for about 100 years now. Sorry. But actually, it serves you right for being horrible to Daniel. Love Hannah the highest, Daisy. P.S. There are eggs in the fridge.